Welcome to Love's Tender Flame, Tales of Romance. I'm Martell, reading Come Out of the Kitchen by Alice Duer Miller. Chapter 7. He did not get back until almost dinner time. The meal was not an agreeable one, though Jane Ellen's part of the performance was no less perfectly achieved than usual. It was evident that there had been a scene between the two ladies. Cora's eyes were distinctly red, and though Mrs. Falconer's bore no such evidence, she looked more haggard than was her wont. Tucker was still feeling somewhat imposed upon. Smithfield's manner suggested a dignified rebuke. Crane felt no inclination to lighten the general tone, and altogether the occasion was dreary in the extreme. As soon as they had had coffee, Cora sat down at the piano, and drawing Burton to her by a request for more light, she whispered, "Won't you take me out in the garden? I have something I must say to you." Crane acquiesced. It was a splendid, misty November night. The moonlight was of that sea-green color which, so often represented on the stage, is seldom seen in nature. The moon concealed the bareness of the garden beds, lent a suggestion of mystery to the thickets of what had once been flowering shrubs, and made the columns of the piazza, which in the daytime showed themselves most plainly to be but ill-painted wood, appear almost like the marble portico of an Ionic temple. The air was so still that from the stables almost a quarter of a mile away they could hear the sound of one of the horses kicking in its stall, and the tune that a groom was rather unskilfully deducing from a concertina. Crane whistled the air softly as he strolled along by his companion's side, until she stopped and said with great intensity, "I want to say something to you, Burton. I'm not happy. I'm horribly distressed. I ought not to say what I'm going to say. At least, the general idea seems to be that girls shouldn't, but I have a feeling that you're really my friend, a friend to whom I can speak frankly, even about things that concern me." "You make no mistake there, Cora," he returned. He was what is considered a brave man, with calm nerves and quick judgment. Physical danger had a certain stimulating effect upon him. Morally, too, he did not lack courage, though good-naturedly inclined to have everything as pleasant as possible. He was not in the least afraid to make himself disagreeable. But now, at the thought of what Miss Falconer was going to say to him, he was frankly and unmistakably terrified. Why, he asked himself, young and timid girls could go through such scenes, and it was said actually enjoy them. Why should he be unreasoningly terrified? Terrified with the same instinctive desire to run away that some people feel when they see snakes or spiders. Why should he feel as if prison walls were closing about him? 2 years ago, when you and I first began to see each other, Miss Falconer went on in a voice that she kept dropping lower and lower in order to conceal its tremors, "I liked you at once, Burton. I liked you very much. But aside from that, you know I'm not always very happy with my mother. Aside from liking you, I made up my mind in the most cold-blooded, mercenary way that the best thing I could do was to marry you." "Well, I call that a thoroughly kind thought," said Crane, smiling at her as a martyr might make a little joke about the lions. "It wasn't kind," said Cora. "It was just selfish. I supposed I would be able to make you happy, but really, I thought very little about you in the matter. I was thinking only of myself. But I've been well repaid for it." She stopped almost with a sob. And while she was silently struggling for sufficient self-control to continue, Crane became aware that the front door had opened, letting a sudden shaft of yellow light fall upon them through the green moonshine, and that Tucker had come out on the piazza. He was looking about. He was looking for them. Not a sound did Burton make, but if concentration of thought has any unseen power, he drew Tucker's gaze to them. "Burton," said Tucker. There was no answer. "Burton," he called again. Miss Falconer raised her head. "Someone called you," she said. Then Crane's figure became less rigid, and he moved a step forward. He was saved, for the time at least. "Want me, Tuck?" he said. Solon came down the steps carefully. He had reached an age when the eye does not quickly adjust itself to changes of light. "Yes," he said, "I do want to see you. I want to ask you one question. Did you or did you not assure me the boy Brindlebury had left the house?" "I did so assure you," answered Crane, "and I had been so foolish as to hope we had heard the last of him. Smithfield told me before dinner that he had left early in the afternoon." "Smithfield lied to you. The boy is in bed in his own room at this moment." "How do you know? Go and see for yourself." Crane was just angry enough at everyone to welcome any action. Only a few seconds elapsed before he was in the servants' wing of the house. All the doors were standing open, disclosing black darkness, except one which was closed, and under this a bright streak was visible. Crane flung himself upon this, thinking it would be locked, but evidently Brindlebury had not thought any such precaution necessary. The door at once yielded, and Crane entered. Brindlebury, fully dressed, was lying flat on his back on the bed, with his legs crossed in the air. A cigarette was in his mouth, one of Burton's cigarettes. A reading lamp was at his elbow, and he was engaged in the perusal of a new novel which Crane had received the day before and had strangely missed ever since. On the floor nearby was a tray, empty indeed, but bearing unmistakable signs of having been well filled only recently. Crane took the cigarette from Brindlebury's mouth and the book from his hand. "Now," he said, "I'll give you 5 minutes to get your things together and get out." There were no signs that packing had ever been contemplated. All Brindlebury's belongings were undisturbed. The boy looked at Crane. He would like to have answered, but he could not think of anything to say, so he got up slowly and tried to smooth his hair, which was very much rumpled. "I'm not positive I have such a thing as a bag," he observed at length, but a little search revealed one in the closet. It was marked B. Reveley. "A token of respect from your late employer, I suppose," said Crane. The boy did not answer. He was rather sulkily putting on his clothes. He was not a neat packer. A toothbrush and some pipe tobacco, a wet sponge, and some clean shirts, boots, and pajamas were indiscriminately mixed. The 5 minutes, unmarked by any conversation, had almost elapsed when light steps were heard in the hallway, and a voice exclaimed, "Did you have a good dinner, honey?" And Jane Ellen came spinning into the room, all the demureness gone from her manner. At the sight of her employer, she stopped, and her hand went up to her mouth, with a gesture expressive of the utmost horror. Brindlebury did not stop packing. He was now filling in the corners with shaving soap and socks. His sister turned to Crane. "Oh, sir," she wailed, "we've acted very wrongly." "Jane Ellen," replied Crane, "that really doesn't go. It was a good manner, and you worked it well, but it is now, if you will forgive my saying so, old stuff. I cannot look upon you as a foolishly fond sister trying to protect an erring brother. I think it far more likely that you are the organizer of this efficient little plan to keep him here unobserved, eating my food, reading my books, and smoking, if I am not greatly mistaken, my cigarettes." "Oh, Bryn, do you take Mr. Crane's cigarettes?" said Jane Ellen. "Not unless I'm out of my own," said her brother. "Without clearing his own honesty, he impugns my taste," said Crane. It was plain that Jane Ellen was going to make another effort to improve the situation. She was thinking hard. At last she began. "I don't defend what we've done, sir, but if you would have let me see you alone this afternoon, I was going to ask that Brindlebury might stay just this one night, only I couldn't speak before Mr. Tucker. I'm so afraid of him." "There you go again," said Burton. "You're not telling the truth. You're not in the least afraid of Tucker." "Well, not as much as I am of you, sir." "Jane Ellen," said Crane, "I believe you are a very naughty girl." He was surprised to find that every trace of ill temper had left him. "I know what you mean, sir," said the cook, and this time her voice had a certain commonplace tone. "And it's true, I haven't always been perfectly honest with you, but a servant can't be candid and open, sir. You know yourself it wouldn't do." "I'd like to see it tried," returned Crane. "Well, I'm honest now, sir," she went on, "in asking you to let Bryn stay. He'll apologize, I'm sure." "I will not," said the boy, still packing, but his sister hardly noticed the interruption. "He will do what I tell him when he comes to think it over, if you will only relent. Don't you think you're just a little hard on him? He is my brother, and it would make me so happy if you would let him stay." The desire to make others happy is not a crime. Yet Crane felt nothing but shame at the obvious weakening of his own resolution under the peculiarly melting voice of Jane Ellen. He glanced at the boy. He thought of Tucker. He looked long at Jane Ellen. Who knows what might have happened if his eyes, which he decided he must wrench away from hers, had not suddenly fallen upon a small object lying undisguised on Brindlebury's dressing table. It was the pearl-set miniature. All three saw it almost at the same instant. The hands of all went out toward it, but Crane's reached it first. He took it up. "Have you any explanation to offer, Brindlebury?" he said. "I can explain!" exclaimed Jane Ellen. "I'm sure you can," Crane answered. "The only question is, shall I believe your explanation?" "He took it because it reminded him of me. That's the only reason he wanted it." Crane looked from the miniature to the cook. He knew that this was also the only reason why he himself wanted it. "Jane Ellen," he said, "go downstairs and order the motor to come to the side door at once." "Mr. Crane, you're not going to have Bryn arrested?" He shook his head. "I ought to, perhaps, but I am not going to. I'm going to take him in the motor car to what I consider a safe distance and drop him." "Just like a stray cat?" gasped Brindlebury's sister. "Cats usually come back," said the boy with a return of his normal spirits. "Cats have 9 lives," replied Crane significantly. Something about the tone of this remark put an end to the conversation. Jane Ellen obediently left the room. Brindlebury struggled frantically to strap his bulging bag and succeeded only with the assistance of Crane. When they went downstairs, the motor was already ticking quietly at the side door. No one was visible except Jane Ellen, who was wistfully watching it. Brindlebury got in and set the bag upright between his knees. Crane got in and had actually released the brake when, looking up at the cook still standing there, he found himself saying, "Do you want to come too, Jane Ellen, to see the last of your brother?" Of course she did. She looked hastily about and then turned toward the stairs, but Crane stopped her. "No," he said, "don't go up. There's a coat of mine there in the coat closet. Take that." Immediately she reappeared in a heavy Irish frieze overcoat he had had made that spring in New Bond Street. It was an easy fit for Crane. It enveloped Jane Ellen completely. The collar, which she had contrived to turn up as she put the coat on, stood level with the top of her head. The hem trailed on the ground, and the sleeves hung limp from below the elbows. She looked like a very small kitten, wrapped up in a very large baby's blanket. But she did not allow the superfluity of cloth to hamper her movements. She sprang into the little back seat, and they started. After about half an hour, Crane stopped the car. They were now in the outskirts of the main town of the district. "This is where you get out," he said. Brindlebury obeyed. "Smithfield paid you your wages, I believe," and Burton plunged into his own pocket. "Well, there's something extra." At this, a trembling might have been seen in the right sleeve of the frieze coat, and the next second Jane Ellen's hand emerged from the cuff, and Crane, for the first time, experienced the touch of her fingers. She pushed his hand away from her brother's. "Don't take that money, Bryn!" she cried. Brindlebury's hand dropped. "No, of course not. What do you take me for?" he said. Then he snatched off his cap and kissed his sister goodbye, and picking up his bag, he disappeared into the darkness. There was a moment's silence between the other two before Crane said, "Better get into the front seat. You'll be more comfortable." Holding up her coat, as if it were a coronation robe, Jane Ellen stepped in, sat down, and wrapped it carefully about her knees, a process in which Crane, by the greatest effort of self-control, did not join. Again the brakes squeaked and the motor moved forward. A great deal has been said about silence as a method of spiritual communion, but few of us, in social situations at least, have the courage of these convictions. Most hostesses, on looking about a silent dinner table, would be more apt to think that they were watching a suspension of diplomatic relations rather than an intercommunication of souls. But there are moments, for all of us, when we value silence as highly as Maeterlinck himself, and this, in Burton's opinion, was one of them. The moonlight, so much more beautiful and affecting than he had found it earlier in the evening in the garden, the smooth, quick motion, the damp night air blowing against his face, made him acutely aware of the presence at his side of that small, still companion. He felt no need of speech, nor did he speculate as to her state of mind. He drove and enjoyed life deeply. They were nearly at home again before he asked, "Why was it you did not wish your brother to take what I offered him?" "Because," she answered in a tone of simplicity and sincerity he had never yet heard from her, "it would not have been good for him. He's young and takes things too easily. He ought not to have money he does not work for." "I am glad that you feel like that," he said. "I was afraid you refused to let him have it because you were angry at me for sending him away." He was afraid that she would relapse into her old tone of mock servility and assure him that she would never be guilty of the liberty of criticizing her employer. But she did not, she said. "But I was not angry at you. I should not have respected you if you had done anything else." He answered seriously, "You knew that I was sorry not to do what you asked me to do." "Yes, I knew," she said. They did not speak again. They left the car at the garage and walked to the house. There had been failure in cooperation, for Smithfield evidently had not known of the expedition. The side door was locked, and so was the front door. "I suppose I'd better ring," said Crane reluctantly. Somehow he was not eager to face Smithfield's cold, reproving glance. "No, follow me," whispered Jane Ellen. She led him to the kitchen entrance and pointed to a window. "I don't believe that window has had a bolt for 60 years," she said. "And to think," returned Crane as he gently raised it, "that before I took the house I complained of its being out of repair." He climbed in and opened the kitchen door for her. He had a match, and she knew the whereabouts of a candle. They still spoke in whispers. There was, of course, no real reason why they were eager to let the household sleep undisturbed, yet they were obviously united in the resolution to make no unnecessary sound. "Wouldn't you like something to eat?" breathed Jane Ellen. "A good idea," he answered. She divested herself of his coat and beckoned him to the icebox. They had entirely ceased to be master and servant. "Some of that chicken salad you had for dinner," she murmured, "if any of it came down. I dare say it didn't, though Smithfield's so fond of it." Crane laughed. "You mean he eats in the pantry?" She nodded. "All butlers do, and Smithfield's a little bit greedy, though you'd never guess it, would you?" They laughed softly over Smithfield as they spread out their simple meal on the kitchen table. Jane Ellen showed a faint disposition to wait upon her employer, but it was equally vanquished by his assertion that he would eat nothing unless she sat down too. A few minutes later it was he who was doing whatever work was to be done, and she sitting with her elbows on the table watching him. There seemed, after all, nothing unnatural in this new relation. Presently Willoughby, hearing the sound of dishes or smelling the chicken salad, awoke and jumped on the table. "Do you mind him?" asked his mistress in melting tones. Crane didn't mind him at all. He offered the cat a bit of chicken. Willoughby seemed to enjoy it, chewing it with quick little jerks of his head. And presently he raised a paw and deflected a fork which Crane was carrying to his own mouth. Even this Crane appeared to find amusing. Before they had finished, the kitchen clock behind them suddenly and discordantly struck once. Burton started and half turned his head, but she stopped him. "Let's guess what time it is," she said. "Of course, it's later than 10:30. It might be 11:30, or even 12:30. It could be 1, but certainly not 30. They looked around. It was 30. Jane Ellen sprang up. "Oh, how dreadful!" she exclaimed, without, however, any very real conviction. "How terribly late! And I have to get up so early in the morning." "It makes me desperately ashamed," said Crane, "to think you have to get up and cook for all of us, and that I can sleep just as late as I want to." She laughed. "If you haven't anything worse to worry about than that, you're very lucky." But he had something to worry about, and as soon as she was gone, he began to worry about it, namely, the painful and complicated situation of a man who has fallen in love with his cook. Please join me next time for another romantic chapter of Come Out of the Kitchen by Alice Duer Miller, here on Love's Tender Flame. Until then, love deeply and live beautifully.